Hi, welcome to Blogging Heads TV. This is Culturally Determined, and I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade. And my guest today is Mike Gerber. Mike, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Mike Gerber, and I'm the publisher of The American Bystander, a new humor quarterly in print.
Right, so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about humor writing, print humor writing, and your new publication. And you are also the author of a number of books. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about your illustrious past?
You can take the boy out of the Midwest, but you can't take the Midwest out of the boy. I have written to date 10 novels and sold 1.25 million books in 25 languages worldwide. My biggest seller was a parody of Harry Potter, which was published, I think, first in 2003 and then turned into a series, which sort of launched a craze all throughout Europe for long-form print parody, which I had been doing for many years. I assumed that people in Europe and in England particularly knew about it, but it's more, I think, more of an American college humor magazine thing. So before writing books, I worked in the magazine business for about 15 years. Started out as a magazine consultant for big magazine companies in New York, specializing in humor because I had run the humor magazine at Yale, the Yale Record. And then after that, did a bunch of magazine humor writing, New Yorker, Atlantic, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, that kind of stuff, Washington Post. And have done a little bit of television, did a little bit of SNL, Weekend Update stuff, and have done a little bit of web, worked on something for the Huffington Post earlier this year. So yeah, I've kind of 25 years and I've done a ton of different things. And The Bystander is just the kind of culmination of a lot of things that I've been doing since I was 12, So It's a pleasure to be talking to you about it.
Great. Well, thank you again for coming on. And we should say that the Yale Record Humor Magazine is how I know you because you resurrected this humor magazine that was actually America's oldest college humor magazine, founded in, was it 1871?
1872.
72.
Yeah,
and had gone to, it was where Gary Trudeau first published his cartoons.
Right.
He was a Yale undergraduate, and a lot of it spawned, a lot of the early New Yorker cartoonists published the Yale Record, and then it kind of died out for a while, and you resurrected it when you were an undergrad, and I wrote for that magazine when I was an undergrad too.
And you wrote very well for it.
Thank you. So let's talk about The American Bystander, which you are launching via Kickstarter. So I guess the first question is, why did you decide to use Kickstarter to launch this new magazine?
Because when you're launching a magazine, well, particularly with humor magazines don't fit very well with the way that conventionally published corporate magazines work. They don't really work well with advertising. They do really sell well with off the newsstand, but it's just not a very good fit. So the trick with humor magazines is getting to readers. If you can get to readers, then you'll get the audience that you're supposed to have, and you'll figure out a way to fund it. We were going to Kickstarter because, given myself and my partners, we've all worked in the business for long enough that we have plenty of friends, both like hedge fund people and comedy writers who've made enough money so that this thing could happen. Having it happen, it wasn't as much of an issue as actually getting out there and trying to test to see if there's an audience for print humor anymore. Because it's really been a generation since there's been a really robust print humor magazine. And if you want to ask me why I say that in the light of The Onion, I can tell you more about that. But
would you say
Kickstarter
Spy magazine was the last?
Yeah, I would say Spy was probably the last robust one. National Lampoon kind of petered out through the 90s. But what year were you at Yale? Were you 95 or something?
No. I was much later than that. I started in 2001.
Oh, okay. Okay, so even by then it was dead. It's there was a magazine that was a great magazine called Nickelodeon Magazine, which was for kids, and it lasted for a couple of years, and it used a lot of these same people because the same people who worked for Lampoon worked for Spy, worked for this Nickelodeon magazine. So it's kind of a crew of people, and I knew those people existed, and I had been told a million times by civilians, normal people, magazine readers, that, gosh, it'd be great if there would be a magazine like this again. I would totally subscribe. I would totally read it. And so, it was really interesting because it was like with the record. When I came to Yale, I knew there was a tradition. I knew there was a tradition there, and the record was, as you say, the oldest one in the country, and that it had produced a tremendous number of graduates, and that there was this, on the one hand, there was this college humor magazine tradition. On the other hand, there was something had happened so that the people who wanted to read that, the business model didn't work anymore. The old business model didn't work anymore. So when you say I resurrected the record, it was very interesting because I'm by nature a comedy writer, and then by necessity I'm a comedy editor, and then by real necessity I've become a publisher, because it's just very rare to have somebody who both loves this stuff and also can sort of say, well, what kind of business model will work? So with the record, and this happened right after you left, we had resurrected it in the 90s. It was going, but it wasn't making any money. And so when I was living in New York and working in the publishing business, I was convinced that there had to be a way, from a capitalist perspective, because we do live in that kind of society, to match up the product that people wanted to create with the audience of people who wanted to read it. Mm-hmm. And a couple of years after you had left, we finally hit on a model using a digital printing technology, which has allowed the record to become monthly and very profitable. And so with the Bystander, it's the same sort of way. It's like I knew that we had people who would produce great stuff, and I knew that there had to be, in this big, rich country, I knew there had to be a certain number of people who still wanted to read this kind of thing. So what we're trying to do now is we're just trying to get them together, and then figure out what that business is. And so Kickstarter is a great way to get the word out in that way, and test and see, well, who wants to read this? How many people are there? How much will they spend? What kind of stuff do they like? What kind of stuff do they not like? Mm-hmm. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And we'll include a link to the Kickstarter page, so anyone who's watching this
Great.
who wants to contribute.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's going better than I ever could have hoped. We're 61% funded after 3 days.
Okay,
and
so that's great. So it seems like you're
it's
well
going to
on the
happen.
way to
it's going to happen. And
okay,
but really, for our, it was, you go and you walk around the right offices in New York, you can raise $25,000, which is what we want to do with this thing, and that's a small amount. That's not going to put us on the newsstand or anything. Mm-hmm. What we want to do, and I think what's really important, is we want all the people that possibly could like writing by George Meyer from The Simpsons or Jack Handy or all that stuff, because those are the people we've got. We want them to go and pledge, either as a print magazine for $25 or a PDF for $5, to sort of see, well, are people going to be consuming this in paper, or do they prefer on their tablet, or what? So we're running so lean that I think we can really make a go of it at a very small number of supporters. But we do need supporters, because we need to know that people actually want us to do it. Because if they want us to do it, we'll figure out how to do it.
Right. So if you want to support this Kickstarter, for $5 you can get a PDF, and for $25 they said you can get the print edition.
The print edition.
So I guess that kind of leads to my next question: is why did you want to actually do a print quarterly? Print is really under siege in this country, and numerous magazines have folded over the past 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Why print?
Well, for a couple of reasons. One, the internet is about reading. I mean, at this point, it's more and more and more video, so it's turning closer to a television model. But, for the first 20 years of its existence, it's really been about reading. It's really been about reading text. And yet, there's been this consistent sense in the culture that print, if you want to call it print, like print is besieged or print is dying. Print is not dying because reading's not dying. People are doing more reading than ever before. Mm-hmm. The platforms are changing. The business models are completely, I don't know if I can swear on this, but
Go for it.
The business models are completely fucked. I mean, it's like the internet is not built to publish things. It's built to distribute information, and it does that beautifully well. but it's created an environment where it's great. It's great for people. I run a Beatles blog, a Beatles fan blog, because I'm a huge Beatles fan. And it's probably the most popular Beatles fan blog on the internet. It's called Hey Dull Blog. And that's wonderful. That's what the internet does really well. That doesn't make me any money and never will and kind of never can. And so if you're a professional writer, if you're a professional artist, you're a professional designer, the internet has really destroyed that whole business model. And so why print? There's a couple of reasons for that. There are kinds of comedy that work better in print. If you know this, if you're writing a print comedy piece, and I forget who said this to me, it was Harvey Kurtzman or something. It's like, because I've talked to all these people for 20 zillion years. I know all these guys. And it's like, if you want to write a story, if you want to convey a picture in somebody's head of 1,000 barbarians coming over the ridge, well, you can't do that as a video unless you have $20 million. You can't cast that. You can't produce it. You can't cut it together and have that. But you can write it as a short story. Mm-hmm. So, this idea, this sort of turning of the culture away from print or away from words, static words, and imagination-generated experiences to a much more literal kind of image-based situation has really narrowed what people consider comedy to be, and really narrowed what kind of content, what kind of experiences people have when they consume that comedy. So there's a ton of stuff you can do that in print that's best in print, and that's one of the things we want to try to do. There's a whole other thing where there's a design component. It's a whole environment that you create in print, and people have been doing that for 100 years. By the time you got to National Lampoon, it was a complete science. The look of it, the feel of it, was part of the whole imaginative space. So, going to crack.com, which is great, and scrolling through a listicle on your phone, that's a completely different experience than, say, for example, a magazine piece like Michael O'Donoghue's Vietnamese Baby Book. It's two different things. And so for me, I looked and I said, well, the internet does X well. It pushes content, little bits of content to people wonderfully. I love Twitter, and Twitter's hilarious, and I do that. And I love crack.com, and that's hilarious, and I do that. And Clickhole and The Onion, all that stuff, that's great. But there's a whole other kind of comedy. There's a whole bunch of other formats. And not coincidentally, as you work in comedy longer and longer, you're done with, Twitter. You're done with, it's like you want to do something a little bit more interesting. And so as I started to investigate the project, I did find that George Meyer had pieces. And I did find that Jack Handey had pieces. And Brian McConaughey, my co-editor, it's all that stuff. So that was print. We wanted to, this is an experiment. We want to see if we do a really old-fashioned kind of print humor magazine, an immersive experience with good design and interesting content and cartoons and blah, like really intense in this way. We want to see if people still like it and how many people there are. Because we know that Twitter's going to exist. We know that the 140-line joke or the 140-character joke is going to be there. But I want to see if we can use this technology to protect and sort of expand some of these older formats that are great too. So we'll see.
What you just said kind of reminded me of, I don't know if have you read the George R.R. Martin Game of Thrones Song of Ice and Fire books or seen the TV show?
You're assuming that I have time to read anything. Well, Kate, my wife is a television writer, and she loves fantasy, and she's read them all. Yeah.
Right. So one of the things that I know about the origin of that series is that Martin was originally a television writer, and he felt very constrained by the budget and kind of the level of special effects in the 90s. So he decided, I'll just write these novels, and I can put dragons in them, and I can put anything I want in them. And so he did it. It's this huge canvas, and then strangely, it actually did become a TV series because the technology progressed enough that they could render CGI dragons and stuff, and now it's even it's bringing people. Like I started watching the show, and then I read
to the books. Yeah, right. Yeah, see, that's actually a hugely great point. Is that I think that print, because it forces the creator to imagine very intensely. It's a great way to develop a property. Not for nothing does everybody I know out here, I'm in Santa Monica, not does, everybody I know in the business is like, bring me a book. I want a book. I want to buy a book. I don't want to buy your screenplay. I want to buy a book. Because they want properties, they want franchises. And so that's another thing that we're trying to do. We're going to be running longer stuff. We're going to be running short stories, even novellas, because it's a great way to develop properties, and it's a great way for people in the business to get to know your stuff. Because here's the thing. Writing a great book and putting it up on Smashwords is not a way to get a book published. It's a way to play the lottery. And yes, occasionally, what is that book, Wool, I think? Or like Stephanie Meyer or other stuff. Yes, people do win the lottery, but it's not a career, and it's not a publishing business. It's not like a substitute for like what people used to do all day. So it's you need writers and artists and creative people of all stripes. They can't live in this sort of Ayn Randian, internet-y, fantasy. People need health insurance. People need institutions. People need a place to work. People need usually they need people to work with. All these things are essential. And if we're all kind of atomized and working on our computers, furiously and throwing them up on our, message boards, and then maybe it'll hit or maybe it won't. That doesn't work after age 25. It doesn't even really work at age 25. It's playing the lottery. It's not a career. So what we're trying to do with the Bystander is like create an institution. Now, is it going to be a strong, rich institution that's going to be able to do a lot of things? I hope so. Or is it going to be a small institution that can only publish a quarterly and we're always struggling for money? It's like your local PBS station. I don't know. But the way that's going to happen is the way that we get strong is if readers, if consumers want it and pay for it. Because if they don't pay for it, then advertisers are going to have to pay for it. And we know what advertising-supported comedy is like. And there's a world full of that. And also, too, it's getting harder and harder to make any money, too.
Right.
So, the guys on my staff who are so great are guys that got into the network television model when it was still strong and still the only game in town. And 20 years later, they are now developed fully as talents because they were able to develop on Fox's dime as a writer of The Simpsons or NBC's dime as a writer of SNL. Jack Handy is great because he's had a gazillion years of practice. And you can't have a gazillion years of practice if you got a day job. That's just a fact. So, anyway, it's something I have a lot of passion about because there's this sense, that people doing creative careers, certainly since the beginning of the internet, are kind of like trying to get away with something. No, it's just, this is our talent, what we like to do, just like a lawyer likes to be a lawyer. Mm-hmm. So the society, we have to figure out ways so that if you want cultural products, if you want good comedy, you got to figure out ways so people can pay their bills in the meantime. Send their kids to college, have health insurance.
Right, exactly. So I mean, people who are Twitter comedians, no one gets paid for what they put out on Twitter unless they're being specifically sponsoring a product or something, and probably not a lot of comedians are doing that.
Right.
So I believe your model envisions, paying well for
as well as we can. I mean, it really, like I say, I hate to keep coming back to this, but it really will depend on how many people pledge. Mm-hmm. What I'm investigating now is like literally squeezing everything till it screams so that we can give our writers and contributors as much as we can. Mm-hmm. And I'm confident that, these guys, we've been working on this thing for 3 years now, and we've gathered together the people that really understand that this is speculative, and we're all, Brian and Alan and I have to say myself most of all, we've spent thousands and thousands of hours on this thing. So we're never going to make back the money that we would, that we've put in. That's not what this is about. But what it is really about is, and if you've been working for The Simpsons for 20 years, you really don't need the $50 or $100. But if we can pay a decent rate, what that means is that we can then go reach out to somebody who lives in Madison, Wisconsin, who's not connected to the business, and has been putting up hilarious short stories on Smashwords or wherever they're putting at Kobo or whatever they're putting it up now, that nobody knows about. They send us something, and we actually can give them $250, $500, whatever that is. And then because we are sending it out to our friends who are agents, who are producers, who are comedy writers out here in Los Angeles or New York, then that's a way for people to get into the business. So, once again, it's like playing, right now it's like playing a lottery. And we want to try to make it more efficient than that. Because I think there's a lot of talent out there. And I mean, Twitter's hilarious. The people on Twitter are hilarious. And we want to try to figure out a way, how do we monetize that? Not because I think we should, but because we live in a capitalist society. I mean, you have rent to pay.
Right. This is true. So you mentioned The Onion earlier, and since you've been writing comedy for 25 years or so, how has written comedy changed, and why do you think The Onion doesn't really qualify as kind of a traditional?
Well, and I would say, I mean, it's really interesting. I think that anybody of a certain age, I remember having this conversation with Scott Dickers many years ago, who's one of the founding editors. He was exactly The Onion. He was exactly my age, and we had the conversation, and he said, The Onion comes from the National Lampoon Sunday newspaper parody, which was put together was top edited by P.J. O'Rourke and John Hughes. And it's a wonderful piece of work, and it's a follow-up to the Lampoon's legendary high school yearbook parody. The thing about The Onion, and the Onion is beautiful and gorgeous and a tremendous American institution. That is absolutely true. But it's one or two maybe slices of what a college humor magazine or national humor magazine used to be. Parody news was one piece. The sort of fake column that The Onion does so well. I mean, God. See, so it's very interesting. Comedy writing has changed in a couple different ways from The Onion. First of all, The Onion's writing is fucking immaculate. It's great. I mean, it's really, really, really honed. And there's a level of kind of, I had an old boss who used to use this word, it drive me crazy, but voiciness, like it's just really, really wonderful. And I think it has to do with improv too. The improv tradition replacing, just as the Onion has replaced sort of more traditional, varied humor magazines, general interest humor magazines, improv has replaced sketch. And so what you have is you've got this brilliantly precise, brilliantly written, wonderfully flavorful voices over and over. But here's a couple of downsides. One is, and I think this is the major one, the National Lampoon or the New Yorker. Let's use the New Yorker, because the New Yorker started out as a humor magazine back in 1925. Strange as it may seem, that is true. The New Yorker threw off certain talents for larger careers. Benchley and Parker were already kind of well known, but somebody like James Thurber or E.B. White, A.G. Liebling, all these folks. A.G. Liebling fan in the back there. All those folks went on to have larger profiles, larger careers than just the New Yorker. Yes, they worked for the New Yorker, but they weren't just about the New Yorker. The National Lampoon is a perfect example of this too, where, you've got Doug and Henry, and those guys are great, Doug Kenny and Henry Beard. Doug goes on to be one of the co-writers of Animal House with Chris Miller and Harold Ramis. You have the whole National Lampoon Radio Hour, which my partner Brian was instrumental in, with Belushi and Chevy Chase and Gilda Radner and all those folks. So one of the things that The Onion doesn't seem to have done, and maybe it has done it and I don't know it, that could be too, but it doesn't seem to have launched individuals. And I think that that's because its voice is so honed, so machined, and so the same throughout, issue to issue, joke to joke, piece to piece, that there's a lot of editing on it. And so it's really a process. So when I look at The Onion, I go, God damn, this is funny. And this is beautiful process. But when I read National Lampoon and I read Baba Rum Raisin or Mrs. Agnew's Diary, I knew that was Doug Kenny, and he's a fucking funny writer. And if I read Spy and I read the front of book editorial that Kurt Anderson was writing, that's Kurt Anderson. that I know his voice. And Kurt went on to do, and Graydon Carter went on to do this, that, and the other thing. And so I think the rise of The Onion was about, in some sense, it was about email. Although when it was a print magazine, it was very nicely done. It had a humor component, which was the same throughout the satellites. And then it had a advertising component, a humor component, and a review component that was the same throughout all the satellites, all the 5 places it was published. And then it would have local ads. That's very, very smart. And that's something I'd like to try to do with College Humor Magazine, something like that. But, when it became a national institution was really when people started sending around Onion articles via email. And so what you have is, you have a couple things. You have short. You have premise in a funny headline. Premise is totally contained in a funny headline, right, i.e. a subject line. So that's beautiful, perfect for an email. And that's really what got them going. And so from the email, then you started really getting a lot of traffic on the website. But just recently, I think maybe it's longer, they've gotten rid of their print thing. And I completely understand why they would. What we're trying to do, when you would pick up a magazine when I was a kid in the 70s or even earlier, these things were thick. And you would, to use an example people will laugh at, Playboy, for example, about 15% of it was naked ladies. About 85% of it was cartoons and advertising and service journalism and, short stories and excerpts of books. And so, a general interest magazine, which is what a print magazine is the internet has killed that in print for a lot of reasons. But I think that what we can try to do is create a mini version where we're, getting to 5 or 10 or 25,000 people every quarter or every month, whatever it is. And we can create a subgroup out of the larger kind of audience and make a good dollar for everybody as a result. Mm-hmm. Does that kind of answer your question? I mean, it's a larger... to take one thing like The Onion, it's like saying, well, why is Stephen Colbert so funny? You can approach that in a million different ways. The fact is he is really funny, and it's great that he's funny. The fact is The Onion is wonderful, and it's great that it's here. And when I read The Onion, I go, God, I wish I could read a short story written by this writer, or or this or that, or any of the other millions of formats that if you know this type of stuff, people have done successfully and well. It's the same with The New Yorker. You say, well, The New Yorker, what kind of humor, print humor in the United States is really 2 things. It's The Onion, and, well, maybe it's like listicles, too. It's like crack-style articles, which are hilarious as well. And then it's New Yorker casuals. And those are fine. Those are all great. But there's so much more you can do. Multi-page comics. Ideas where the premise isn't, it's not just you write the premise and then you're just ringing the changes for 700 words and you're done. That's a New Yorker casual. There's just so much you can do, and there's no reason, I don't think, to restrict yourself.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've noticed this. I think the Onion has kind of, it was originally a parody of like a tabloid magazine, and it became a parody of USA Today, kind of.
Right.
And they've kind of mirrored the changes in the larger media that they're parodying.
Absolutely.
So a lot of their articles are now just one paragraph.
Yeah.
They seem to have a lot fewer of the pieces that, when I started reading in the late 90s and early aughts. So they must have decided that people are just reading shorter things. Yeah. And so they're just sticking to headline and one paragraph of joke and that's it. And they can probably churn out more, more pages and get more clicks than doing the 500 word piece.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And they're right to do that, obviously, I mean, that obviously works for them. That's their business model. And they're going where the numbers are telling them to go. But see, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's absolutely not what we're doing at the American Bystander. There's no pressing financial reason for me to be doing this. It's except that I like it, that I want it to exist. And I think that's what everybody's kind of coming to this for, whether, we've had some modest success or a lot of success or whatever. We want to try to create something that preserves the formats. But
are
also,
you going to have? Sorry, are you going to have advertising? Is that part of the plan?
Yes, yes, we will. But here's why. I like ads. I personally think that they're fun to look at, and they're great for. And you're going to laugh because you and I'm sure have had conversations about this. They're great for sequencing. So like if you have a book, like for example, Our Dumb Century. Our Dumb Century is a tremendous book of comedy writing. It's my generation's version of the National Lampoon High School Yearbook. It's phenomenal. Okay, it's incredibly written. It's incredibly designed. It's so smart and deep. See, that's the other thing about print is that you can do all these little jokes in print. You can kind of cram it full, and then people will kind of go back to it and have it be deep like that. And I've done tons of print parody that works in that way, and it really is a delight to do, and it's a delight to read. But the thing about the Our Dumb Century is, after about 20 pages, you can't read anymore. You're just like, oh God, too much candy. I gotta go rest. I gotta go do something else. And so the thing about advertising is, just from a pragmatic standpoint, for me, it's a rest. Oh, great piece by Ellis Wiener. Oh, great piece by Ron Barrett. Oh, great piece by Mallory Ortberg. Oh, here's an ad for Mallory's book. Okay. So there's that. So there's a utilitarian reason for it. The other reason is that, just as we're trying to figure out who wants a product like this, and how many of you are there, and how much will you pay, and all those things, we're trying to create a community, believe it or not. I mean, that's the whole thing. We're trying to find the people in this country who still like this kind of stuff, and then give that to them. And if you like the Bystander magazine, you're probably going to be a reader of humor books, and not just humor books, not just like 101 Uses for a Dead Cat and all the bullshit that the publishing industry continues to pump out. It's like comic novels, like Catch-22 and all the rest. There's a reason why we haven't had another Catch-22. There's a reason why we haven't had another Confederacy of Dunces. And it's systemic. And so with the Bystander, we're trying to create a systemic solution to a lot of these problems, an institution that helps solve these problems. So when we run an ad, the only ads that we're ever going to run, as long as I'm involved in it, is ads that we actually think are good, for stuff that we know and we think are good. Like, for example, I reached out years ago when we were doing The Dummy. I reached out to some people at Rhino who do all the repackaging. And I said, do you guys have any comedy stuff that you do? And they're like, yeah, we have a collection of Steve Martin's television stuff. I'm like, oh, great. We have a collection of Richard Pryor, the biggest collection of Richard Pryor that you can get, most complete. I said, can we run ads for that? How much does it cost? Nothing. No, that's not what this is about. It's about, if you like our editorial, you're going to want to know about this stuff. And so I'm trying to give the readers much value in that way as I possibly can. Now, readers may turn around and say, ads? Screw it. I don't want ads. You're charging me $25 for a print magazine? I don't want ads in it. Okay. Or the contributors may say, ads? Bullshit. I don't want ads near my stuff. I'll go, okay. So we won't run them. But for me, it's really more like, trying to build a community. Now, in the future, are people going to say, hey, are going to try to give us money? Maybe, I don't know. And then we'd have to figure out, and I'd probably talk to my partners, and the amount of money we'd be getting would be so minor. It's like, that's the other thing. There's some real benefits in being small. And that's, if you want to know why there's no National Humor magazine on the newsstand, is that it can run perfectly on 50,000 people or 100,000. It can do great. But if you're Hearst, it doesn't work. The way you publish magazine doesn't work unless you're pushing out 1 million copies a month of that particular title. So it's more about scale. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to use the internet to get to this smaller but still present audience. And then service it in 1 million different ways. It's like you could say, we're going to run a website. Either it'll be informational or we'll eventually start running pieces on it. If we can pay people, we're not going to run a website if we can't pay people. But, you could ask, well, when you do a website, are you going to film events? Are you going to film concerts and charge for that? Yeah, maybe. It's all going to depend on what our contributors are going to want to do, and what our readers will pay for. How this works really is friends of mine say, Mike, I want to do a podcast, or I want to do a magazine, or I have this ebook. And then I go, okay, how am I going to, I think there's a way that we can get this out and have it look good. I have a friend who can design it for you, and then I think we can charge X number of dollars for it. So that's how this all works. But that's why it's so important. So for when we do actually put it out there, that anybody possibly who could be interested, like goes and shows interest, buys the $5 PDF. We know that the moment that the thing that I give the PDF out, the moment that ships, it's free. It's gone. I'm not going to, there's no way you can control that. It's like with the Barry Trotter books, So we sold 1 million of them, and all of a sudden it was like a switch flipped, and then we didn't sell any. And funnily enough, that's when it started appearing on the torrents. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a business model that actually pays the creators, doesn't build a building on 6th Avenue in New York City, but pays the creators and also allows people to enjoy it freely. And I think that there's a space for that. I think the days where, you walk in and it's like this 40-story skyscraper, on 6th and 47th Street, the places I used to go in when I was a magazine consultant, I don't think those days are ever going to come back. But I do think that there's plenty of opportunity for nice little businesses that produce magazines and produce books and produce content. So,
well, you're optimistic, and I hope that your optimism is warranted for sure.
But the other thing is, here's the other thing that we're doing, which is really, I think, important. We're not taking any rights from anybody. Mm-hmm. Like if you write for the New Yorker, I don't know what their contracts are like now. I've been told they're pretty onerous, but if you write for the New Yorker, they're taking some percentage of the subsidiary rights. So if your article in the New Yorker gets turned into a movie, you're paying Condé Nast is taking some of that money. Mm-hmm. What the hell is that? No. So that was one of the reasons that this started too, is that, these people, they know that their stuff is valuable, and they know that the real money in it is not in the magazine piece, that it's in the television show or the movie or whatever, who knows, whatever it would be. And so we really from the beginning have said, that's not what this is about. It's not about trying to sort of finagle you. And Aryeh, I don't know how many contracts that you've signed in the book or magazine business. They're all screw jobs. And it's just like, no. As the pressure has come increasingly on people in book and magazine publishing, the corporations, the contracts, they haven't squeezed the distributors or they haven't squeezed all the middlemen. They've squeezed the authors. They've squeezed the creators, because the creators in the book and magazine business have nobody to protect them. Unlike, and my wife works in television as a WGA member, so I know this, unlike in television and movies, where you have a strong union that says, oh, wait a sec, that contract is not happening. And that's why you have people in print starving, and you have people in television and movies, if you can get to a certain level, who can buy a house. So that's what, I don't know. I mean, as you can see, we're fighting against the tide here, but I do think that we can do something, and something is important.
Yeah, I agree. So you've managed to make a living in mostly writing print, although you've obviously done other stuff in print humor for over 20 years.
Yeah.
If there's a young person out there who's watching this and they're thinking about, they've written for their college humor magazine. Yeah. And they are thinking about pursuing a career as a writer, or maybe going to grad school or law school. Yeah. What advice would you give to this young aspiring humor writer?
Come from money. I'm really not kidding. I mean, I don't think. I say that because I wish that somebody had said that to me 25 years ago, because I don't. And I've been very fortunate. And my folks have been very generous and helpful, like every once in a while, certainly when I was young and living in New York. I mean, people, I think I read about this in another place. It was a blog post I read, but it really always made an impression on me that it was somebody who was working in the publishing business in New York, and they were saying, God damn it, we need to be honest with people coming into this to say there is no way to make your bills starting off as an assistant at a book publishing house. Not unless your parents are helping you. So it's not fair, particularly if the people that those internships or whatever are pulling from are usually very ambitious, very bright, very motivated and driven people who have really done a lot in their young lives. And then they come and they try to work in the magazine or publishing business or, for an agency or whatever the production or whatever it is. And they think that when they can't pay their bills, they're doing something wrong. No, you're not doing anything wrong. That is the unfortunate reality of what we've allowed it to become. I once had a conversation with Louis Lapham back in the 90s, and he was then the publisher or the editor of Harper's. And he turned to me because he's Yale class of 57. I'm Yale class of 91, you're 2002 or whatever you are. So Louis comes from money. Louis, his family is oil and from San Francisco. But he's also been aware enough, he sees what's going on. And so he was saying, we would talk about the publishing business, and he would say, there was a time, and I remember it, and it was in the early 80s, where at the beginning of the 80s, somebody starting out on Wall Street and somebody starting out in publishing basically made the same amount. But then it shifted, and people in publishing started making less and less, and people in law or banking or whatever, certainly Wall Street, I remember that's what he said, but more conventional careers started making more and more. And so I think if you want to do this kind of stuff, I think you have to be aware of that reality. And you have to be kind to yourself about it. That maybe you will have to have a day job for 10 years, or maybe you will have to ask mom and dad for a loan, or maybe you will have to go to law school. But at the same time, the other thing is I think that the generations before young people have let them down in certain regards about institutions. And of course, I would say this because I've spent my entire career first at the Record and, going through creating institutions for young people. The reason that you and I know each other isn't that I'm a comedy writer, and it isn't that I'm an alum of the Yale Record. It's that I was the alum of the Yale Record who actually would go up to school and try to teach you guys how to do this and try to help you with publishing and all that sort of stuff. Mentor. Okay? And there's not a lot of mentoring that goes on in books and magazines. Certainly, I don't remember that. Maybe that's changed, but I doubt it. Even out here in film and TV and all that sort of stuff, web, there's some mentoring, but it's such a competitive business. And the difference between making it and not making it seems to be so high. Even if it's not the reality of the difference, but in people's heads, like, oh, if I get that webisode, I'm going to be rich, and so I can't help you, even if you get the fucking webisode and you're not rich. You're just like making it for a year. So I think that one of the other things that we're trying to do with the Bystander, and boy, you're hitting all my talking points perfectly, I really appreciate it, is we're really trying to create an opportunity for people who are older to reach down and connect with people who are starting out or who are younger. And this is good for both sides because it's good for the older people because as you get older, you have a tendency to really be like, back in the day, we did it better. It's really true. And of course, when you're younger, you have a tendency to look up and go, oh, those fuckers, they've got everything and I don't have anything, right? So when you know each other, the old guys and gals are teaching the younger people those formats. Here's how you write a casual. Because the form of the New Yorker casual has decayed over the last 20 years. If you look at the casual that John and I wrote for the New Yorker, it was all John's piece, but it was a great piece. It was a parody of Raymond Carver that we got in there in 1997 and was then in the collection of best ever humor in the New Yorker, that first one called Fierce Pajamas. And once again, it's all John's piece. It's not me.
This is John Schwartz.
This is John Schwartz, who writes for the Intercept. He's a wonderful writer. And he is also a record guy. If you look at that kind of piece, or you look at a Veronica Gang piece, or you look at Sandy Frazier's pieces from earlier, they are much more ambitious, much less timely, much more literary, than what you find at the New Yorker Now. The New Yorker Now is basically, I promise you, if we don't have a piece by today, we'll have it soon about Joe Biden not running for president. And that's their humor. And that's fine. That's perfectly fine. But that's not, if you look at James Gerber pieces from the New Yorker, those things are 5,000 words long. I mean, it's like, so that's a lot of what we're trying to do with the Bystander. We're trying to look for holes. Like, where are the holes in literary culture? Okay, boom. Where are the holes in, like, mentoring? Okay, we'll do that. Where are the holes in, like, the media? Okay, we'll do a podcast. Or we'll do this. We'll do that. So that's kind of what we're trying to do. And as long as people come and show us, yes, we want you to do this, we'll give you $5. I mean, $5 doesn't even get you into the movie. If people do that, then we can then leverage our connections and our goodwill with people and say, look, there's an audience for this. Let's do it. And then they match or kick in or whatever. They go, because that's what anybody who's writes comedy, they want people to read it. They want people to enjoy it. And that's the same as if you're, somebody who's just starting out or somebody who has $50 million in the bank because you created The Simpsons. You still want people to see it. That's why you do it. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create ways so that people can see it and that our creators can have as much freedom as possible. Because that's another thing. That's kind of your George R.R. Martin thing, too. Because if you write in television, you're not, unless you created the show, and even sometimes then, because Kate has worked at Breaking Bad and Mad Men and all these shows, now works for Rectify. There's a lot of, even in this golden era of television with the cult of the showrunner, there's a lot of things to keep in mind. So with print, you really can do whatever you want, and kind of partially it's because nobody cares. So let's take advantage of it and have fun.
I think we're close to the end of our time. Is there anything else you'd like to say about the project or?
God, and this has been so serious too. What is there anything? I mean, is there anything else? Was there anything else you wanted to cover?
I don't think so. I think I would just encourage people to check out the Kickstarter.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
How about this? How about why don't you give some recommendations for people who are interested in written humor? Maybe they read the humor pieces in the New Yorker, but they don't really know
where else to go.
That. Yeah, where else? What books what will they look for?
I will do that. I will also say that contact me through the Kickstarter. I have a sideline of advising college humor magazines using the record model that we created so that they can do student magazines profitably and well. And every year I do, two or three more. So anybody who sees this, who's interested in starting a college humor magazine or starting a student magazine, get in touch. I'm crazy right now, but I'm happy to tell you, to give you some time. And in general, too, if there are questions, I'm interested in talking to you. I'm interested in hearing what's going on. I'm interested in seeing if I can help or we can help. So, get in touch. As far as what to read, I did an article for Splitsider, that humor website, a couple of years ago. And I don't know. I haven't read it recently, and I'm sure I would change it. I'm sure it's not. I'm sure it's not current in my mind. But I think that there are some good. There's some good places there. Obviously you can start out with the New Yorker folks, Thurber and Benchley and Perelman and Dorothy Parker. You can't go wrong with those people. E.B. White and Catherine White put together a collection called A Sub-Treasury of American Humor, which is basically their idea of the best humor, I think from Mark Twain to like 1935. And you can dip in there. Some of it's dusty as anything. Some of it's just old-fashioned like crazy. But some of it's really good. And then, of course, you have the National Lampoon generation, the sort of 60s, 70s guys. And there is certainly the National Lampoon High School Yearbook. You should learn that. You should learn it. See what they're doing. Because that magazine is you can draw a bright line between before that magazine, what American comedy was like, and after. And for better and worse, the Lampoon kind of aesthetic has taken over American comedy. We're not doing exactly that. We have some of those writers, but we're not going to be doing some of that. So, like, for example, if you can get your hands on the best of 10th anniversary collection of National Lampoon, 1970 to 1980, that's a tremendous book, and you will lose your mind if you haven't seen it. I mean, because they're really talking in the current idiom. They're not talking about current things, but you'll get it. Then, of course, the Onion stuff, of course. There are some great writers from the New Yorker in the 70s and 80s. Ian Fraser, his first collection, Dating Your Mom, is unearthly good. Veronica Gang is good. Mark O'Donnell, who was a very good friend of mine who passed away and was the first person that I asked to be in this magazine. His collections and novels are good.
I took his class.
Did you? Lucky, you lucky duck. When I was there, they wouldn't even everybody in the English department got hives. I had to do a history major as fast as I could and do the magazine on the side. And Mark did that class because he was John and I went down to his place and would hang out with him, and he'd be like, I'm broke. I don't know what to do. And we were like, well, why don't you teach a class at Yale? Well, I don't know how to do that. All right, then I'll get so we got the paperwork and we took it down there and we said, Mark, fill this out. You're great. So he was great. Mark O'Donnell's great. And his brother's a really lovely guy too. He's worked in television, Steve. But Elementary Education by Mark O'Donnell is a wonderful book. Getting Over Homer is a great book. It's a novel that he wrote. Trying to think. I mean, Simon Rich, I love his stuff. He's in the magazine just a tiny little bit, but he's hilarious. Mallory Ortberg, go to the Toast and read her. I think my wife and I just laugh our guts out over that stuff. There is a ton of good stuff. But those are the classic. I'm sure as soon as we hang up, I'll think of 20 more. And like I say, if you get in touch with me through the Kickstarter and you have questions like this, I will answer them. I shouldn't answer them. I don't have time, but I will. Aryeh will tell you this. I have no choice. So.
Well, we certainly appreciate you sharing your time with us today.
Oh, yeah. My pleasure. As you can hear, I hope it came through that I so appreciate you being interested. And this is a project that we've worked on for many years and has been a real passion project, a heart project for a lot of us. So we're so excited that we're almost funded. We're very confident we will be funded. But go now and make sure so we can print as many copies as we want. Because we're not just doing a magazine. We're recreating a whole audience, a whole format, a whole form of art.
Okay, I think that's a great place to end it. And again, we will link to the Kickstarter.
All right, thank you.
And encourage people to chip in, $5. That's less than a sandwich, and you will
less than a sandwich.
Certainly get your money's worth.
Yeah, that's right.
So thank you, Mike, and thank you to our viewers. And we'll see you again next time.
Thank you.